Transparency is the foundation of accountability. In this segment, you will see unfiltered and unedited reality. We are presenting raw, primary footage directly from the front lines of justice, offering you an objective window into the complexities of the law.
Stand right there. Don't move. Show me your ID, now.
I paid my fare. What's the legal reason for this stop?
You match the description. Step away from the gate.
Description of what? I'm not doing anything illegal.
Hands where I can see them. Stop arguing with me.
Stand right there, sir. Do not move. The voice cut through the underground noise at 8:17 a.m., sharp and practiced bouncing off the tiled walls of the subway station. The train had just screeched to a stop, metal grinding against metal, a wave of warm air rushing through the platform. Commuters poured out in a hurry, shoes slapping concrete, coffee spilling, backpacks bumping into strangers who did not apologize. The man stopped at the turnstile slowly. He was black, mid-50s, wearing a dark wool coat and carrying a leather briefcase worn soft at the handle. He turned his head slightly, not startled, just attentive. "Is there a problem, officer?" His voice was calm, steady, almost quiet against the chaos. "I asked you to stop. Let me see your ID." The officer stepped closer, hand hovering near his belt. His badge caught the fluorescent light. Behind him, the digital clock flicked from 8:17 to 8:18. Late for work. Late for court. Late for everything. The man glanced around. People were already watching. A woman slowed her pace. A teenager raised his phone, pretending to text. "On what basis?" the man asked. "I paid my fare. I am entering the station like everyone else." "You match a description." The officer said it quickly like a reflex. He blocked the turnstile with his body. "Step away from the gate." Description of what the man did not raise his voice. He did not step back either. The smell of oil and damp concrete filled the air. Another train thundered past on the opposite track, wind whipping coats and newspapers. The officer's jaw tightened. "Sir, do not make this difficult. I need to see your identification now." The man exhaled slowly. He reached into his coat, deliberately narrating every movement. "I am reaching for my wallet. You do not need to escalate this. There is no reason for a stop." The officer glanced at the forming crowd. He felt it, the eyes, the phones, the unspoken judgment. He had already committed. Backing down now would mean admitting something he did not want to name. He raised his voice. "Hands where I can see them. Do not argue with me." "This is not an argument," the man said. "This is the Constitution." A murmur rippled through the platform. Someone whispered, "This is messed up." Another voice said, "Just comply, man." The officer took a step closer, crowding the man's space. The turnstile beeped uselessly as commuters tried to squeeze past, frustrated. "Sir, last warning. Step aside or you will be detained." The man looked directly at the officer for the first time. His eyes were clear, unflinching. "If you detain me without cause, every second of this will matter." He paused. "And it will not end the way you think." The officer reached for his cuffs. At that moment, the station went quiet in a way only crowded places do right before something irreversible happens. To understand how a routine morning turned into a constitutional crisis, you have to step away from the subway platform and go backward. Long before the fluorescent lights and the raised voice, there were two very different paths moving toward each other, shaped by power, fear, and everything America never fully reckoned with. The man at the turnstile was named Harold Whitman, 56 years old, born in rural Mississippi to a school teacher and a mechanic who fixed engines out of a dirt driveway. His parents taught him early that excellence was not optional for black children who wanted to survive, let alone succeed. Harold studied under a single light bulb, read borrowed law books, worked nights unloading trucks. When his high school counselor told him law school was unrealistic, he applied anyway. He graduated top of his class, full scholarship, Ivy League law school. While his classmates chased corporate salaries, Harold clerked for civil rights attorneys who defended people nobody else wanted. He stood in courtrooms where judges looked past him. He learned to stay calm when prosecutors spoke down to him. He learned that anger made people stop listening. By 42, Harold Whitman had become the youngest black justice ever appointed to a state Supreme Court. He wrote opinions cited nationwide. He overturned wrongful convictions. He ruled against police departments when evidence was tainted or rights were ignored. He was known for precision. No rhetoric, no theatrics. Just the law clearly applied. That morning, he was headed to deliver a guest lecture on constitutional protections in public spaces. Ironic in a way nobody could script. He dressed like he always did when he wanted to disappear into the city. Neutral coat, no robe, no security. He believed public servants should move through the world like everyone else. He had no idea he was about to become a case study. The officer was named Daniel Mercer, 34 years old, 7 years on the force. He grew up in a suburb where police were praised and questioned rarely. His father had been a corrections officer. Dinner table conversations were about control compliance and respect for authority. Daniel learned early that hesitation was weakness. At the academy, Mercer excelled at tactical drills, struggled with de-escalation. His evaluations mentioned confidence initiative, but also a tendency to escalate minor encounters. He had 3 complaints on record, all dismissed. One involved a stop that yielded nothing. Another involved language a body camera conveniently failed to capture. Each time, supervisors noted the issue, then moved on. Mercer believed the city was becoming unpredictable. He watched internal briefings about fare evasion, assault statistics, quality of life enforcement. He absorbed the message that vigilance mattered more than context. That suspicious behavior often looked ordinary until it was too late. He learned to trust his instincts without interrogating where they came from. On the morning in question, Mercer had already been frustrated. His radio crackled non-stop. A delayed train had backed up the platform. Supervisors were pushing productivity metrics. Presence mattered. Stops mattered. Visibility mattered. He spotted Harold Whitman moving with confidence, briefcase in hand, not rushing like everyone else. Something in that calm bothered him. To Mercer, calm looked like entitlement, like someone who believed rules were flexible. He did not see a judge. He did not see decades of restraint. He saw a black man who did not look afraid in a space where fear was expected. When Mercer stepped in front of the turnstile, he was not thinking about law. He was thinking about control, about being seen by commuters, about not letting someone slip past him and later regretting it. Each second that passed made retreat harder. Each question from Harold felt like a challenge, and Harold understood exactly what was happening. He had seen this before, just never from this angle. In briefs, in transcripts, in appeals. A stop justified after the fact, a vague description, a subjective feeling elevated to reasonable suspicion. He knew the pattern. He also knew how quickly situations like this turned dangerous if pride took over. That is why he spoke carefully, why he announced his movements, why he did not raise his voice. He was protecting himself, not asserting dominance. He was buying time. The tragedy is that both men thought they were doing their jobs. Harold believed in the Constitution as a living promise that restrained power. Mercer believed his authority existed to test boundaries. One was trained to question assumptions, the other was trained to act on them. Their histories made collision inevitable, and when they finally crossed paths beneath the city surrounded by strangers pretending not to stare, the imbalance between them was invisible. One carried the weight of the highest court in the state. The other carried handcuffs and unchecked discretion. Only one of those things mattered in that moment. The platform felt tighter now, like the walls had inched closer. The officer's hand hovered inches from the cuffs, not touching them yet, but close enough that everyone could see where this was going. Harold Whitman stood still, briefcase resting against his leg, shoulders relaxed by discipline, not comfort. Officer Harold said, evenly, "I am willing to cooperate, but you need to tell me what law you believe I am violating." "That is not obstruction, that is a question." Daniel Mercer did not answer. He glanced at the growing semicircle of commuters. Phones were out now, no longer hidden. A man in a construction jacket held his device chest-high, lens pointed straight at them. A woman whispered into hers, probably live streaming. The beeping turnstile continued its useless protest. "I told you," Mercer said, "description match. Step away from the gate." Harold slowly produced his wallet. He removed a standard state ID and held it between 2 fingers. He did not yet show the other cards tucked behind it. "Here is my identification. You will see that my address matches. You will see there is nothing outstanding. After that, I expect to be free to go." Mercer took the ID, barely glanced at it. The name meant nothing to him. He did not run it yet. He had already decided this stop was not over. "You think you are in charge here?" Mercer said quietly, leaning closer. "You do not get to tell me how this works." A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Someone said, "He gave you his ID." Another voice answered, "Just let him go." A third voice cut in, This is why people record. Mercer straightened, aware of the commentary. His face hardened. Sir, turn around and place your hands on the wall. On what grounds? Harold asked. His voice did not change, but his eyes sharpened. Am I being detained? Yes. Mercer said it too quickly. He reached for the cuffs. The sound of metal clicking open echoed louder than it should have in the station. A collective inhale passed through the crowd. This had crossed from uncomfortable to undeniable. Before you do that, Harold said, pause. You should know who you are stopping. Mercer hesitated for half a second. Not long enough to rethink, but long enough to feel something like doubt. He scoffed. You going to tell me you are a lawyer? Harold met his gaze. I am a justice of the state Supreme Court. For a moment, the words seemed to bounce off Mercer without landing. Then someone in the crowd gasped. Another whispered, no way. The man with the construction jacket lowered his phone slightly, eyes wide, then raised it again, steadier than before. Mercer laughed once, sharp and dismissive. That is not funny. You think you can say something like that, and I will back off. Harold nodded toward the wallet still open in his hand. My credentials are there. You can verify them in under 2 minutes. Mercer felt the eyes again, more than before. This was no longer just about him and the man in front of him. This was about authority being tested in public. He imagined the report. He imagined supervisors asking why he let someone walk away. He imagined regret, but only one kind of regret. He closed the cuffs around Harold's wrists. The click was final, loud, recorded from 5 angles. A woman shouted, Are you serious right now? Another said, He told you who he is. A third voice broke, almost pleading. Officer, stop. Mercer guided Harold toward a concrete pillar. His grip was firm, not violent, but unmistakably controlling. Harold did not resist. He adjusted his balance, keeping his breathing steady. He had argued cases where this exact moment was dissected frame by frame. He knew how it would look. He also knew how it would end. As Mercer radioed for transport, his voice tight, controlled, the crowd did not disperse. They stayed, watching, recording, bearing witness in a way the city had learned to do. And beneath the station, under flickering lights and humming rails, the gap between power and accountability was shrinking fast. The walk from the turnstile to the service corridor felt longer than it was. Every step echoed. The cuffs tightened slightly with each movement, cold metal biting into skin that had signed opinions shaping state law. Harold Whitman kept his hands steady behind his back. Not because he had to, because he knew how quickly a flinch could be rewritten as resistance. The officer guided him past the yellow line, past the stairs, past the phone's still raised lenses following every motion. The crowd noise blurred into a low hum, like the city itself holding its breath. Somewhere above them, another train arrived. Life continuing on schedule. You are making a mistake, Harold said quietly. His words were not a warning. They were a statement of fact. Daniel Mercer did not respond. His jaw was locked, his eyes fixed forward. He could feel something slipping control. Certainty, maybe both. He compensated by tightening his grip. Not enough to draw a complaint, just enough to remind himself who was in charge. They stopped near a concrete pillar marked with old graffiti and peeling paint. The fluorescent light above flickered twice. Mercer turned Harold to face the wall. Spread your feet. Harold complied. Slow, deliberate. He placed his forehead lightly against the cool concrete. The smell of dust and iron filled his nose. In his mind, he cataloged details. Time, location, witnesses, the sound of cuffs closing, the exact phrasing used. This was no longer just happening to him. It was becoming a record. Behind him, Mercer spoke into his radio. Unit requesting transport. Male detained for investigation. Uncooperative at turnstile. Uncooperative. Harold noted the word. He had seen it hundreds of times. A convenient label. A bridge between nothing and everything. The crowd did not disperse. If anything, it grew. Commuters missing trains. Strangers standing shoulder to shoulder in quiet defiance. A man in a suit shook his head slowly. A woman wiped her eyes. Someone said, "This is wrong loud enough to carry." Mercer shifted his stance. He felt exposed. Every second stretched the situation further beyond what he could control. He told himself the station cameras would back him up. That procedure was procedure. That supervisors preferred action over hesitation. They led Harold up the stairs to street level. Each step pulled at his shoulders. The morning air hit his face cold and sharp, a contrast to the stale heat below. Sirens wailed somewhere nearby. A patrol car waited at the curb, engine running. Mercer opened the back door. "Get in." Harold paused for half a second, just enough to look back at the people watching. At the phones. At the truth being preserved in real time. Then he lowered himself into the hard plastic seat. The door shut with a hollow thud. Inside the car, the smell of disinfectant and old coffee clung to the air. Harold sat upright, cuffs still on, eyes forward. His reflection stared back at him in the darkened window. Calm, controlled, unbroken. In the front seat, Mercer adjusted the mirror. Their eyes met briefly. Something flickered there. Doubt, maybe. Fear. Then Mercer looked away and pulled into traffic. The city moved around them like nothing had happened. For Harold Whitman, the injustice was not just the cuffs. It was the familiarity of it. The knowledge that for millions this was not a shocking exception. It was routine. And for Daniel Mercer, the silence in the car was louder than the crowd had been. Each mile carried him further from the moment where he could have stopped. Neither of them spoke on the drive to the precinct. They did not need to. The precinct lobby smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Phones rang, printers hummed. Officers moved with routine indifference until they noticed the man in cuffs walking between them with his head high and his pace unhurried. Nobody rushed. Nobody panicked. Not yet. Daniel Mercer handed Harold Whitman over at the desk with clipped efficiency. Detained for investigation. Suspicious activity at the subway. Refused to comply initially. His words were practiced, stripped of tone, shaped for reports rather than truth. The desk sergeant glanced up. Mid-40s. Tired eyes. He looked at Harold, then at Mercer, then back at Harold again. Something about the posture gave him pause. This man did not look confused. He did not look angry. He looked prepared. Name, the sergeant asked. Harold Whitman, Harold replied. The sergeant typed. The keyboard clacked loudly in the brief silence that followed. He paused, looked at the screen, blinked once, then again. His posture changed, subtle but unmistakable. Badge number? The sergeant asked Mercer without looking up. Mercer gave it. His confidence wavered just slightly. Sir, the sergeant said, addressing Harold. Now, do you have any additional identification on you? Yes, Harold said. In my wallet, inner left pocket. You may retrieve it. The sergeant nodded to a nearby officer who carefully removed the wallet. He opened it. His fingers froze. He pulled out a credential encased in dark leather embossed with gold lettering. He stared at it for a full second before reading it again. The room seemed to quiet around them. The sergeant stood up. Justice Harold Whitman, State Supreme Court. The words landed like dropped glass. A nearby officer stopped mid-sentence. Someone at the printer turned slowly. Mercer felt heat crawl up his neck. No. That is not possible. He stepped forward. That could be fake. The sergeant shot him a look that ended the thought where it stood. He turned back to the computer and began typing fast. A second screen lit up, then a third. He picked up the phone. Clerk of court. This is Central Precinct. I need to verify a judicial credential. Yes, I will hold. The seconds stretched. Harold stood quietly, cuffs still on, eyes forward. He had argued before this court. He knew how verification worked. He knew what was coming. Confirmed, the voice on the other end said. The sergeant hung up slowly. He looked at Mercer, now really looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. His face drained of color. Remove the cuffs, now. An officer stepped forward immediately. The metal opened. The pressure released. Red marks ringed Harold's wrists. He flexed his fingers once. No complaint, no comment. Sir, the sergeant said, his voice different now. Lower, careful, I apologize. This should not have happened. Harold met his eyes. Apologies do not undo constitutional violations, he said calmly. But they will be documented. A lieutenant appeared from the hallway, summoned by the shift in tone. What is going on? He asked. The sergeant handed him the credential. The lieutenant exhaled through his nose, closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and looked straight at Mercer. You stopped a sitting Supreme Court justice, in public, without cause. Mercer opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The lieutenant turned back to Harold. Judge, you are free to go. A supervisor will escort you. We will preserve all footage reports and radio traffic. You will receive copies. Harold adjusted his coat, picked up his briefcase. I expect them by end of day, he said. Every second, every angle. Yes, sir. As Harold walked toward the exit, the precinct seemed smaller, quieter. Behind him, careers recalibrated in real time. Paperwork would follow. Investigations. calls up the chain that could not be undone. Outside, the city moved as it always did. But inside those walls, the truth had arrived with a name, a title, and a paper trail. And Daniel Mercer stood still, watching the consequences take shape, realizing too late that authority is not immunity and ignorance is never a defense. The story did not end at the precinct doors. It began there. By noon, the video from the subway platform was already circulating. Multiple angles, clear audio, timestamps visible, a calm black man asking lawful questions, an officer escalating anyway. By evening, national outlets were calling it what it was: a Supreme Court justice detained without cause while entering public transit. Harold Whitman did not give interviews that day. He did not need to. The footage spoke with brutal clarity. His legal team filed a federal civil rights complaint within 48 hours. Unlawful detention, false arrest, violation of the Fourth Amendment, violation of equal protection. Each claim backed by video witness statements and departmental radio logs. The city moved fast, faster than it ever did when ordinary citizens filed similar complaints. Internal Affairs opened an investigation immediately. Daniel Mercer was placed on administrative leave by the end of the week. His prior complaints resurfaced suddenly, relevant, suddenly impossible to ignore. Patterns emerged. Stops that escalated without cause. Reports that leaned heavily on vague language. Suspicious behavior that meant nothing concrete. Public reaction was relentless. Millions of views, tens of thousands of comments. Some furious, some resigned, many asking the same question. If this can happen to a Supreme Court justice, what happens to everyone else? Protests followed. Not violent. Focused. People gathered outside the transit authority and the police headquarters, holding signs with a single phrase printed over and over. Credentials did not protect him. Why would they protect us? The department released statements, carefully worded. Regret without admission. Commitment to review procedures. But the investigation did not slow. Body camera footage, platform surveillance, officer training records. Everything was pulled. 3 weeks later, the findings were released. Daniel Mercer had no reasonable suspicion to stop Harold Whitman. The description he cited did not exist. There was no active alert, no reported crime. His decision to detain escalated based on perceived non-compliance, which consisted solely of lawful questioning. His actions violated department policy and constitutional standards that were clearly established. Mercer was terminated for cause. His appeal lasted 9 minutes. The city settled the lawsuit 6 months later. The amount was significant, enough to make headlines, enough to make budgets uncomfortable. Harold Whitman directed the funds into a statewide legal defense program for wrongful stops and arrests. He made that choice publicly, deliberately. "This is not about compensation," he said in a written statement. "It is about correction." The department announced mandatory reforms. Documentation requirements for all transit stops. Automatic supervisory review when detentions exceed 2 minutes without citation. Expanded constitutional training focused on implicit bias and lawful suspicion. Changes that had been recommended for years implemented only after embarrassment forced action. Daniel Mercer disappeared from public view. No press conference, no apology. His name entered into a national decertification database. His career ended not with violence, but with paperwork and consequences he could not talk his way out of. And Harold Whitman returned to the bench. Weeks later, he authored an opinion on a case involving an unlawful stop. The language was precise, clinical, devastating. It cited no personal experience. It did not need to. The message was unmistakable. The law does not bend to uniforms. Authority does not excuse ignorance. And justice, when finally applied, is not loud. It is final. What happened beneath that city was not complicated. It was unlawful, and it was avoidable. Under the Fourth Amendment, a police officer may not stop or detain a person without reasonable suspicion based on specific and articulable facts. Not a feeling, not a hunch, not a description that cannot be named. Entering a subway station after paying fare is not suspicious. Asking why you are being stopped is not resistance. Calmly asserting rights is not a crime. Daniel Mercer violated that standard the moment he blocked the turnstile. He violated it again when he escalated without new facts. And he sealed it when he used handcuffs to compensate for doubt. The law on this is settled. Courts have said it again and again. Authority does not create justification. It must follow it. But law alone does not explain why this keeps happening. Social psychology does. Implicit bias is not about hatred. It is about patterns the brain forms from repetition. Who looks out of place? Who seems threatening? Who is expected to comply without question? When those patterns go unexamined, they shape decisions in seconds, especially when combined with power and stress. Mercer did not wake up planning to stop a Supreme Court justice. He saw a black man who did not look afraid, did not rush, did not defer. That violated an expectation he had internalized. Instead of questioning the expectation, he questioned the man. This is why documentation matters. This is why cameras matter. This is why witnesses matter. If you ever find yourself in a situation like this, there are things that protect you. Stay calm. Speak clearly. Announce your movements. Ask one question repeatedly. Am I being detained, or am I free to go? If you are detained, comply physically while preserving your voice. Record if you can. Ask others to record if you cannot. Do not argue on the street. Argue in court. And understand this. Harold Whitman was protected by education status and visibility. Most people are not. That does not make their rights weaker. It makes accountability more urgent. This story matters because justice did not come from outrage alone. It came from evidence, from clarity, from the law being applied without excuses. The lesson is simple and uncomfortable. Power unchecked will always test boundaries, and rights only matter when people insist they do. So the question is not whether the officer recognized a Supreme Court justice. The question is why recognition should matter at all. What do you think? Should public transit stops require written justification by default? Should departments discipline officers for stops that produce nothing? Should knowing your rights be optional in a free society? The answers start with awareness, and they end with accountability.
Uncovering the truth is more important now than ever. Our goal is to hold power to account by letting the evidence speak for itself. The records don't lie. Thanks for watching and being part of this journey.